I would like to proceed to a fascinating world, calling on our colleague Israel Finkelstein, member of the Academy, and he will address a different world, but a most significant and intellectually rich and beautiful. And Israel will talk about the Franco-Israeli excavations at Kiryat Yarim. Looking forward, Israel.
I am, in this day of lectures, what you guys from the exact sciences would call an outlier, something like that. I'm coming from the humanities, and I had to think about the topic of the lecture, what to speak about, and I decided to speak about this theme for two reasons. The first one is that it represents more than one discipline of the humanities, because I'm going to present the results of an excavation, which means archaeology, and at the same time speak a little bit about biblical exegesis, biblical research at the end of the 25 minutes or so. But this lecture is not completely devoid of subjects that are related to the exact and life sciences, because archaeology in the last few years turned more and more to the exact and life sciences. I myself am involved today with the studies of ancient DNA, molecular residue analysis, and things like this. And some of these novel techniques will be represented today, just a few, in the lecture. And of course, I decided to speak about this theme because these are the results of a project which is a joint venture of Tel Aviv University and the Collège de France. So I think it fits the audience and the event today. So I'm working at Kiryat Yarim, which is a site about 10 kilometers away from here, not far. If you go from here to Tel Aviv, 10 kilometers in the direction of Tel Aviv and to the north of the main highway is the site of Kiryat Yarim. And I'm working there with my two colleagues from the Collège de France, Thomas Romer, who is the head of the Milieu Biblique in the Collège de France, and a member of, an associé étranger of the Académie des Inscriptions et Belles-Lettres, and Christophe Nicole from the Collège de France. The site of the place Kiryat Yarim is mentioned in many biblical references, very diverse and interesting. First of all, on the border between the inheritance of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin in the book of Joshua, then in the list of towns in a very peculiar way, because it is mentioned both on the side of Benjamin and on the side of Judah, then as a side town of one of the towns of the Gibeonites, if you remember your Bible, and so on. And most importantly, in the ark narrative in the book of Samuel. And this is really the most important one. The story goes as follows, and I will tell it to you very briefly because it is important for the continuation, the rest of the lecture. The people of Israel, before the time of the monarchy, according to the story, went to the battlefield to engage the Philistines. They were terrified of the Philistines, so they took the Ark of the Covenant from the site of Shiloh with them to the battlefield. The children of Israel were defeated by the Philistines, and the Ark was taken captive by them to their cities. Then something strange started happening, that the Ark started bringing all sorts of calamities on the heads of the towns of the Philistines, and they very quickly understood that they have to get rid of it. So they sent it to the town of Beth Shemesh. The people of Beth Shemesh also didn't really understand what to do with it, so they wanted also to get rid of it and sent it to the town of Kiryat Yarim. And here is the verse that I wish to read to you with your permission about the events in Kiryat Yarim. And the men of Kiryat Yarim came and took up the ark of the Lord and brought it to the house of Abinadab on the hill, Bagiv'ah. And they consecrated his son, Elazar, to have charge of the ark of the Lord. This is in the book of Samuel. Now, the first question that we have to face is, where is the place called Kiryat Yarim? Because first of all, we need to identify the place before we wish to start research in order to understand the background of the story. Now, in this case, the identification is very clear and easy because the place Kiryat Yarim is referred to in the description of the border between Judah and Benjamin. That is to say, when one goes from Jerusalem to Mei Neftoach and then to Kiryat Yarim and to Kesalon, places which are identifiable, the location of this place is also clear. Not only that, in the 4th century, Eusebius of the church in Caesarea says that the place is located 9 miles from Jerusalem on the way to Diospolis, which is Lod, near the airport today. And finally is the name. The name is extremely interesting. In Arabic, this place is known as Der Elazar. Der in Arabic is monastery, the monastery Elazar, and apparently this preserves the name of the priest which was consecrated to take care of the ark according to the book of Samuel. What's the meaning of this? The meaning is that there was a monastery there in Byzantine times, probably in the 5th and 6th centuries CE, and that the monastery was called the monastery of Elazar, and hence the corruption in Arabic, Der Elazar. Now pay attention before we continue that this place is located exactly on the border between the two Hebrew kingdoms of the Iron Age, of the 1st millennium BC, the beginning of the 1st millennium, between Israel and Judah. So the question is, what are the goals of these excavations? I mean, we also in archaeology, we need a research question in order to go to the field, I hope at least. So what's the goal? What's the research question that we are having? So let me assure you, first of all, that we are not there as the raiders of the lost ark. This is not the goal of the excavations. I am not there to find the ark. I do not care about the historicity so much of the story. I wish to understand why this story was put in writing, why it was composed, by whom and when exactly, and what it reflects culturally, geopolitically, historically about the two Hebrew kingdoms of the Iron Age. And because this place is located so close to Jerusalem, and because there is evidence in the biblical text that there was a temple there, mind you, according to the story, let's flow with the story for a minute, the Ark of the Covenant was not brought to this place to be put in a storehouse or in a garage or something like that. It was put in a temple. So there is a temple in this place very close to Jerusalem in the Iron Age before the time of King David, because the story goes in the book of Samuel that after a while, after the ark was placed there for 20 years, King David came and took it to Jerusalem. So this is really an engaging question. So first we need to start with the settlement history. What is the settlement history? When was the site inhabited? And there were two intensive surveys carried out at the site, and there was a salvage excavation carried out there in the 90s, and then our own excavations there last year. And I think that I can tell safely, securely, that the site was inhabited starting in the very beginning of the Bronze Age and continued to be inhabited until the early Islamic period for many centuries. However, the intensity of activity, and this is very important for the rest of the lecture, the intensity of activity was not the same. That is to say, in the beginning it was very sparsely inhabited. We know this according to the simply number of identifiable ceramic sherds that we find in our excavations. And the main periods of activity at the site were, as I mentioned on the screen, in the Iron Age in the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, in the late Hellenistic period, you may call it Hasmonean, and in the early Roman period. These are the main phases of activity at the site. So now let's look at the site. This is a picture taken from the north looking south. When I, as an archaeologist with, I think, not too bad eyes for field archaeology, look at this picture, I see that the hill is man-shaped. This is not a shape of a regular natural hill in the highlands. You can evidently see that it has some sort of an elevated box, an elevated podium at the top. So the question, of course, is whether this is true, whether this can be verified, and then, of course, how to date the period when the site, the top of the site, the summit, was shaped by in antiquity. So first of all, let's have a look. This is a very nice orthophoto that we made from the air by flying a drone and taking, the number of pictures needed for such a plane, such an orthophoto. And you can see that there is some sort indeed of a box that can be seen on the top of on the summit of the site. Not only that, on the east and west, there are today very high terraces running exactly in one line for over 100 meters, and they probably some sort of cache the ancient walls within them, the ancient walls that support the elevated platform. So this is really a big riddle. Can we verify this? Before turning to this, let's have a look at the picture taken from the air in the year 1918, which means exactly 100 years ago, by the Bavarian pilots at the end of World War I, the First World War. And again, you can see that some of the lines of these high terraces in this air picture. And then I turn back to the orthophoto to show you in yellow that the elevation on all sides is the same. This is another proof that we are dealing indeed not with a normal hill in the highlands, but which needs to be in a shape of a hill, sort of, with slopes, but rather with an elevated flat platform. And indeed, we called to our help our friends from the Department of Earth Science in the Hebrew University, and they conducted research there, a seismic geodetic research, which proved that the top of the hill has fills of up to 5 or 6 meters. So all this together accumulates to a very clear notion that we are indeed dealing with some sort of an elevated compound. The question is what to do, how to verify this. All this is theory. We need really to excavate and see that we have evidence for this theory. So, of course, needless to say, it is impossible to dig at the top of the hill because there is a convent there. This is the convent of the Order of Saint Joseph, the convent of l'Arche d'Alliance, and it is impossible to disturb the peace of life of the nuns there and excavate on the top. Not only that, I suppose that I don't even wish to dig on the summit because I know already that the summit has accumulation of fills, which means not the original debris from the very early periods. So what to do? Here again, the orthophoto. We decided to work on the slopes in order to verify first and foremost whether there are indeed big walls that support the summit and also to know more about the settlement history of the site. So I will start with the northern part marked here as area A and then turn to the eastern side or southeastern side marked here as area B. So here's a picture of the north and lo and behold, there is a huge wall, as you can see here, running exactly from east to west, in the north, from east to west, with an error from the true north of only 1 degree. And this big wall can be seen also here. It runs for a distance of about 150 meters. So the next one is on the eastern side. There too, in the big terrace, we see the big wall which supports the summit of the hill. Also about 4 meters wide, a very massive one with fills behind it. Now, the question is, so, and here are the pictures of this wall, outside and inside. So indeed, we are dealing with the rectangular elevated platform measuring something like 150 on 110 meters. But okay, this is not enough. Now we have to deal with the question of dating. When was it built? Without answering this question, there is no possibility to continue with our research. We are facing a big problem here. The big problem is that it is impossible to date the big walls with the, conventional archaeological methods. Why is that? Because the top of the hill is eroded and we are already under the floors. And archaeologists dig according to material found on floors. So once we don't have floors, we are in trouble. And because of that, we cannot also turn to radiocarbon dating. For radiocarbon dating, I need good context. And good context can come only from flaws. And we are not dealing with flaws here. So what to do? I mean, many of you here are physicists, so you know that there are other physics-related clocks that we archaeologists use, and the only solution for the problem that I'm facing over here, the only solution is by turning to optical stimulated luminescence. I don't think that I need to explain to you, physicists, what is OSL, optical stimulated luminescence, but just in case, I would say that we are dealing with quartz particles, small ones. Once they are in the air exposed to the sun, they are zeroed from their luminescence signal. Once they are buried in the ground, they start accumulated radiation and they start accumulating the signal, and this signal is measurable according to time. So we took several samples for optical stimulated luminescence. We did this together with the Geological Survey of Israel, and here are the results. We are not going to go into the details. I just would like to mention that we have in red the early dates, and then probably the construction of the elevated podium, and then we have several phases of reconstruction and renovation. And today I'm going to speak only about the early phase of this hill, of this site. So here are the results, and the results, the early results all come from the bottom of the walls, and the bottom of the walls are all different than the upper part. And the results are somewhere around 1150 to 770 BCE. So what to do? It's too big. We are in a difference of 200 years or more here. Luckily, we have the settlement history of the site. It is unlikely that walls like this would have been constructed in periods which are not, do not represent intensive activity at the site. So if we removed everything until the year 800, we are left with 800 to 770, 760 BC. So we can narrow on the first half of the 8th century BC, and this gives us already, something to work with when we come to historical reconstruction. So what to do with this? There are several options here in the year 800 to 760 or 70. I would say the following. First of all, I wish to remove the possibility that this was built by the Kingdom of Judah. Why is that? Because there is no such elevated podium in the Kingdom of Judah, neither in Jerusalem at that time, later, yes, but not at that time, nor in other sites. And all in all, the Kingdom of Judah at that time was relatively poor, and also, as we'll see in a minute, under the domination of the Kingdom of Israel to its north. So in fact, we are left only with two options. One, the Assyrian Empire, which was the dominant empire of the region at that time, and secondly, the northern Kingdom of Israel. Here's a picture of a site in southern Jordan, Busera, near Petra. This is the domination center or the administrative center of the Assyrian Empire in the south along the Arabian trade routes. And this is a very good example of an elevated platform that can be seen from the air. This is a picture from Google Earth. However, one cannot think about an Assyrian domination center near Jerusalem before 701 BCE, that is to say before the campaign of Sennacherib, king of Assyria, on Hezekiah, king of Judah, as I mentioned in 701. And 701 BC is too late for the optically stimulated luminescence dates. So we are left only with the Northern Kingdom, and indeed, in the Northern Kingdom, there are elevated platforms of this type, and here I bring you the most obvious example, which is the site of Samaria. The entire site of Samaria, the ruling compound on top, is an elevated platform of this type. Indeed, probably constructed a bit earlier than the 8th century, but still in the territory of the Northern Kingdom. So all in all, we are now focusing on the first half of the 8th century in the Northern Kingdom. Who is the king? The king at that time is Jeroboam II. I am almost sure that many of you, even if interested in the Bible, do not know much about this king. The reason is that the Jerusalemite written Deuteronomistic history, probably put in writing in the 7th century BC, negated the northern kingdom, in fact, put them in negative light, and avoided reporting about the greatness of some of the kings of Israel. But Jeroboam II, when we look at him from the point of view of archaeology and the point of view of what we know from extra biblical texts of the ancient Near East, was probably the most important single monarch of the two Hebrew kingdoms in their history. He ruled for over 40 years in the first half of the 8th century. At that time, the northern kingdom reached prosperity, and its maximal boundaries, as you can see on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, by the way, is a very interesting drawing of a king sitting on a throne found on a plaster on a wall in the Sinai site of Kuntilet Ajrud, dating to the first half of the 8th century and related to the northern kingdom, and thereby one can suspect that the person whom we see here is Jeroboam II, the king of Israel. In any event, at that time also, Israel achieved the status of a developed administration and possibility to compose literary texts. Here I'm showing you on the right-hand side up a text found on a plaster in a site in the Jordan Valley, Tel Dir Allah, a site of biblical Sukkot. The inscription was found in the 60s, and it tells the story, or it is, let's put it in a different way, it is related to the story of the prophet Bilam, who is described in 2 chapters in the book of Numbers, chapters 22 and 24. And it is a literary text. It shows that there was a possibility already at that time to compose literary texts. And then evidence for advanced administration, including a group that I direct together with a friend from the Department of Physics, Eliezer Pisetsky at Tel Aviv University. We deal with digital epigraphy, and this here is an attempt to use an algorithm in order to check the number of hands in the Samaria Ostraka from the beginning of the 8th century. Now, so the question is the following. Was the monumental platform constructed by Israel during the reign of Jeroboam II as a domination center over Judah in general and Jerusalem in particular? And again, I wish to mention here, yes, before I go to the historical text, let me just mention that an idea of a domination center in this place is not completely alien to what we know about the region in later periods. For instance, we know that after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans 800 years later, a Roman camp was constructed here in the same place near Kiryat Yarim or near Kiryat Yarim. And we know this from inscriptions that were found on top of the site and nearby. One of these inscriptions, which I cite here, specifically mention a person named Sextus Lucilius Bassus, who was the governor of Judea in the years immediately after the destruction of Jerusalem. The meaning is that after the destruction of Jerusalem, some sort of a Roman camp was constructed here in order to guard the approach to Jerusalem to prevent more problems after Judea and Jerusalem were submitted to the Romans. Now, let me just mention before I continue that we know from a chronistic verse in the Bible, in the second book of Kings, chronistic verses are those which are very informative and to the point without any theology in them. And we usually consider these verses as indeed representing the history of the region better than those materials which are portray the strong ideology or theology of the authors. And this chronistic verse which I am describing speaks about the father of this Jeroboam II, who fought the king of Judah in a site not so far from Kiryat Yarim, in the Shephelah, in the lowlands, defeated Judah, took the king of Judah captive, and then broke took over Jerusalem and broke the walls of Jerusalem, which means that Judah was probably subjugated to Israel for a while, for several decades in the first half of the 8th century. So the question again is whether this, what we see here, is a domination compound aimed to control Judah, to dominate Judah, and whether there was a temple of the ark built by Jeroboam II at that time. And please remember that now we are not anymore in the field of archaeology and evidence, but in the field of assumptions and historical reconstructions. So the line should be drawn very clearly between facts and interpretation. So we are now on the side of interpretation, of course. And on the side of interpretation, the question is whether a temple for the ark was constructed over there, and whether the ark narrative, which is a northern story, because it comes from Shiloh, which is a northern site, whether the ark narrative was written at that time in the north. Here is the picture on the left-hand side of Shiloh. According to the story in the book of Samuel, the ark came from Shiloh. Shiloh was the place, the temple where the ark was located in the beginning, before it was taken captive by the Philistines. So we have a northern tradition. The question, of course, should be, had Jeroboam II wanted to reconstruct the temple, why not at Shiloh? Why in this place, Kiryat Yarim? What's behind the story? What's the logic of the story? What's the territorial ideology that the authors, the original authors, northern authors, wanted to portray, wanted to advance? So pay attention, please, to the location of Kiryat Yarim. I mentioned it already before, and I show it to you again here, is on the border between Israel and Judah. So the question is, in my opinion, whether what we see here is construction of a temple in this site on the border between the two kingdoms, dominating Jerusalem, but also advancing an idea of, how to call it, united Israel ruled from Samaria, which, in my opinion, is maybe the root of the biblical idea, very well known to all of us, of a united monarchy ruled from Jerusalem. So I put the spotlight here on the northern kingdom before the fall of Israel and before Judah came to prominence in the 7th century. So what can I tell you? As you can see, we have glass. What else do we have here? Amulets and other samples. Unfortunately, the basket over here remained empty. So we did not find the ark after all, and we are not looking for the ark. But we think that we have finds which can interpret it in such a way that shed a very interesting light and different a little bit on the history of the 8th century, on the history of Israel and Judah, and if you wish, on the process of composition of the biblical text, starting in the 8th century BC. So I can only tell you that we will be, in the summer of 2019, again at the site. It is not going to look in the summer like this, I can promise you, but still you are most kindly invited to visit us, and many thanks.
Do you believe there are other interesting remains or more interesting remains under the monastery which could actually add to your...
Very difficult to say. It's like asking, it's a good question, and it's like asking whether, let's say, below the second temple in Jerusalem, on the Temple Mount, one can find evidence for the Temple of Solomon, something like that. The answer is perhaps. I personally do not think so, because I see how eroded the site is. I see how many fields were put there, and I suppose that when the Byzantine monastery was constructed in the 5th century, there was also some sort of a leveling operation. So I doubt very much whether there are earlier remains on top.
As you are talking also of using hard sciences, physics, could you use cosmic ray muons to investigate the structure of this platform?
What method, excuse me?
Muons, No, muons.
I'm sorry, I'm not...
Some archaeological findings.
Yes,
were
I know,
obtained by mu-
I mean, remote sensing, you mean, some sort of remote sensing.
Using, there are muons created in the upper atmosphere, and then you
yeah.
can use them to see.
So I
things
must
from-
admit that I'm not aware of this technology.
should discuss
and you
with
should
people. Maybe it would
describe
be
it to me later, and I'm more than willing to do it. But remote sensing is very difficult. We thought about several methods of remote sensing and ground penetrating radars and things like this, but in a situation in the highlands with many, with accumulation of fields, it's very difficult. Yes, Jason? Yes, I'm sure.
Okay, not exactly archaeology. Before your lecture, I saw that Achav was the most important king of Israel and not Yerovam II. Would you at least put Achav in the second place?
In the same place.
In the same place?
Yes, why not?
Okay.
You see how forthcoming I am.